Good evening, YouTubers. I'm going to talk about PTSD. Not that I've got it, of course. I don't. I had some. It stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. I have had a few traumatic stresses in my time, but I don't believe I'm suffering from PTSD. But there's a lot of people out there who are and have been diagnosed as suffering from PTSD, and it all comes under the Ministry of Defence as far as the British forces are concerned. The Ministry of Defence, it's a relatively recent government department. It was established in 1964, I believe. But it's no newcomer to traumatic stress, because as far back as the First World War, we had people coming back with shell shock, and they were just gibbering wrecks, and they put them down to just being snivelling cowards back in the day. And they weren't really addressing mental health issues properly in those days. And it went on into the Second World War, where people were suffering from lack of moral fibre, they called it. Again, it was put down to cowardice and spineless people with a big yellow streak, and all kinds of demeaning insults were directed towards people who genuinely had a mental disorder and were afraid in one respect or another. And I've recently watched an interview with Spike Milligan, and for the benefit of those of you who don't know who Spike Milligan was, because he's dead now, he was a soldier in the Second World War, British soldier, and he was fighting the Germans, and he got blown up at some point. He didn't die, but he said his life changed from that moment. You know, as far as mental health issues were concerned, he'd often go into depression, feel quite suicidal at times, and yet he loved his family. It was all, the only thing that kept him going was thinking of his family crying around the grave. But he was really down and depressed, and he was showing classic signs, I think, of post-traumatic stress disorder. But nobody really diagnosed stress disorder until, I think it was the Vietnam War. Because the Ministry of Defence don't want to talk about it. They've known since the First World War that this sort of thing was going on, but they don't want to admit any sort of liability, because they'll get sued, won't they? Or they'll have to pay out families and people and stuff like that. It's all a bit sad, really. I've got some notes here. Yeah, corporate liability, that's a new one that's popped up, isn't it? If I employ someone and I make them work on a dangerous machine, and they get dragged into that machine, their clothing gets caught on it, and they get squashed or injured or even killed, I'm liable because I'm the employer. I can be prosecuted for corporate manslaughter. I can even go to prison. And the Ministry of Defence is well aware that their employees can go to prison. Their employees get injured. There are people that could theoretically go to prison. They've got their own legal departments, of course. And don't forget everyone that works for the Ministry of Defence. The Ministry of Defence covers it's a big umbrella, covers everything. When I was in the army, I didn't have an army ID card. I had what's called a Ministry of Defence Form 90, which was an ID card. MOD 90 we used to call it. And I'm sure that the Navy and the Air Force have got the same thing or something very similar. So everyone in the it's under the umbrella of the Ministry of Defence comes under this. So they're in charge of a lot of people. They even have their own intelligence department, RAF Whitton. It's not quite the same as MI6 and MI5, although I dare say they must be linked as well. So you get people out spying and things, that's all. So they don't want to talk about PTSD, because if you can prove that your mental health has been damaged while you've been working for these people, then they can be sued. They can finish up paying out a lot of money to a lot of people, and they don't want to talk about it. They want to evade the subject, really. You don't want to talk about it for as long as possible. But yeah, depression is one of them. It must be very difficult, you know. I've recently been looking into Sanjin, because Trevor Colt brought out a book called First into Sanjin, and he reckoned his head was fucked when he was in Sanjin. I didn't even know where Sanjin was. I had to Google it. It's in Afghanistan. So there's a river that comes, a fork that comes together into one river. That's Sanjin. And I was watching some documentaries on it, and it was horrific. You know, having to go on a patrol, knowing full well that the floor was wired to explode and take your legs off, but you didn't know where. But you knew it would be, and it was likely to be somewhere. You know, I can't envisage myself going down that road. I remember talking to a guy who was a paratrooper in the Korean War. Bob Parry, his name was. He's dead now as well. I can say his name. And he was one of these people. He was on a very famous battle on top of the hill, and he said the Lee Enfield rifle, brilliant rifle. He said, but it couldn't shoot fast enough. He said they were dropping people with every single shot, and the Chinese still kept coming up the hill with the burp guns, and the people at the back didn't even have a gun. They just had magazines, and they picked the gun up off dead people and put their magazine on and carry on firing. And the job was to get the guns to the top of the hill, and they had no chance of getting to the top of the hill because the parachute regiment were dug in up there, and they were just pulling the pins out of grenades and rolling the grenades down the hill. Boom! So it was an absolute massacre. And one of these Rodneys said to him one day in Korea, there was a minefield, barbed wire fence. He said, "Parry, go and see if those two Chinamen are dead," because there was two dead Chinamen in the middle of a minefield, been blown up. "Yes, sir." And he just cocked his leg over the barbed wire, and he just stopped midway. And he thought, "What the fuck are you? What did you just ask me to do?" And he just turned round and put his leg down, turned round to this Rodney, and he said, "I'm not fucking going. I don't care if they're fucking dead or not. And I'm definitely not risking my life going out there to find out if they are or not. If you want to find out if they're dead or not, you fucking go." And I think people are waking up now. They're waking up to this reality where they just don't have the hold over people anymore that they had in the past, because people are just going to go, "Fuck that, not doing that. You must do fuck," because these stupid people are putting normal people in dangerous situations unnecessarily. It doesn't serve any purpose, does it? I mean, look at all the people that died in Afghanistan, right? Only to one day just decide, "Oh, that's it, we're off. Get on the plane and fly home." So what did you achieve? At least with the Second World War, you were fighting a genuine, horrible foe that refused to die and had to be killed. You know, so there's justification to a point of what you were going through and what you were doing. But you know, for a war to just not be concluded, and all those people having died unnecessarily, I can't imagine what it's like to go to war and put your life at risk for someone you don't know, and for no gain to yourself. You know, I just can't fathom it out at all. But yeah, PTSD, it's very real. It's very real. And if you watch the Spike Milligan documentary, he was a funny man. He went on to be in the Goon show a bit before my time, but they were very popular comedians, very famous comedians, and Spike Milligan was one of them. He spent his life in and out of mental institutions, and he thought mind-bending drugs was the way forward for him, because he just didn't know who he was or where he was. He was cuckoo, and for that time he wasn't depressed, was he, or suicidal. But I've put a link in my community page to one of his more serious interviews, and I think you should watch it, especially if you know anything about PTSD, and watch that, because I'm no expert, but I think he was showing classic signs of PTSD. Thanks for watching. Interested to see your comments below.